Well, this morning we're going to conclude a little mini-series that we call Redeeming Our Emotions. I think we could just as easily call this a sermon series of what do we do on our worst days? Or what do we do in the worst moments of our day? We've covered anger. What happens when we go red? What do we like? We talked about how some anger is actually righteous anger. When we look at the world as it is and we're not moved to some degree, there may be something wrong. But that when our anger takes over, it becomes dangerous and is explosive. We talked about fear, how fear is actually a gift from God given to us to keep us safe and to keep us on the right path, but it can go faulty, and our fear can actually control our lives. This morning, we're going to cover the topic of sadness and sorrow. I know that there are many things that grieve us, but probably nothing makes us as sorrowful or grieves our spirit as much as loss. This last week, we had the opportunity to celebrate the life and death of a church member who had been struggling with health issues for some time. Her funeral service was beautiful, and it was wonderfully done. This is Pat Laws. But funerals are always such strange things for people who we know follow Christ, aren't they? Because in one hand, there is deep sadness. There is true sorrow. We don't get to laugh or play with them. We don't get to experience life. Someone that maybe we had counted on is just no longer there. There's an empty chair at the table. But on the other hand, we know that one day we get to see them again, and that they are right now much happier than they have ever been. They get to be in the arms of Jesus. They have finished the race, and now they get the prize. And so with funerals like this, you can almost sometimes split the room between those who are smiling because of how happy they are that there's no more pain or hurt, but then on the other side, there's also tears because of the loss. However, this past Monday, I was also reminded that it is the 22nd anniversary of one of the worst days in American history. The anniversary of 9/11, which was a day where there was almost unparalleled sorrow nationally and grief, where millions of us felt overwhelming helplessness, and the day just seemed to get worse and worse and worse. So as we journey through sadness and sorrow today, I want to be clear that this is not just a funeral message. This is about whatever happens when we are sideswiped with sadness. It could be that you didn't get that job or that raise that you were really looking forward to. You didn't get into that school, or you didn't do good on this exam or this test. It could be that you are sad right now because you are not who you want to be. Or as you think back through your life, you're not who you thought you would be at this point. It could be a medical report. It could be anything in between. How do we react to bad news? What does sorrow or mourning or grief, what does it look like for you? Do you feel alone? Is it like a cloud that comes over your day? There's no sunshine. Everyone else seems to be happy and smiling, and they're good, but there's this rain cloud that's going over you. What's it like? Whatever that looks like, whatever that feels like, what we do know and what we can hold on to is that God is not absent from these conversations. He is with us. And we can be reminded of the times that others in the Bible have felt unbelievable grief. These are not fairy tale stories, even though some may try to get you to believe that. These are moms and dads. These are brothers and sisters who are feeling the full wheel of emotion. And there are probably characters or stories or passages of Scripture that we cling on to for hope. For me, this last week as I was preparing, I was reminded of Hannah, who was so sad because she had no son. And she prayed and finally had a son, Samuel. And then Samuel was grieved at King Saul's disobedience. He prayed all throughout the night. The psalmist shows a broken heart, distress, grief, sorrow all over the place. Job, exceedingly sorrowful over his personal loss. God himself mourns the misery of Israel when they brought upon themselves pain and sorrow because of their disobedience. But we also see in Jeremiah this expression of grief. Jeremiah is actually known as the weeping prophet, and he writes the book of Lamentations, which is all about this expression of grief. So Lamentations chapter 3, verse 17, we see this. He writes, "My soul is bereft of peace. I have forgotten what happiness is. So I say, my endurance has perished. So has my hope from the Lord. Remember my affliction and my wanderings, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me." This is not just a weak, flimsy sadness. This is real. It's not a minor inconvenience. It's a deep sorrow. And for some of us, maybe that's where we are this morning. Maybe this is where a loved one is, or our family members or friends. Maybe by the grace of God this morning, this is no longer where you are, but you remember a time where that was you. Maybe there's even a little bit of fear that something's going to happen and we're going to slip back into that. Now, if this passage stops here, then we can just sit in our seats. We can be overcome with grief and sorrow. But luckily for us this morning, the passage continues, and we see glimpses of hope and even deep answers to our sadness. It continues in verse 21, "But this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope, that the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases, His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul, therefore I will hope in Him. The Lord is good to those who wait for Him, to the soul who seeks Him." Jeremiah is caught with emotions, sadness and sorrow, but he is reminded that he has hope. And his hope is found in the steadfast love of the Lord that never ceases. It never comes to an end. It never runs out. His mercies are new every morning. If you think that you've made a mistake or that it will never get better, when you wake up the next morning and the sun peeks itself up, you can hold on to this passage that His love and His mercy are brand new. The reset button has started, and that He is faithful to us. That hope, the thing that pulls Jeremiah out of darkness and can pull us out of that place, that difficult situation, is in remembering that the love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. His faithfulness is great, and the Lord is truly good to us. Throughout this series, we've looked through Proverbs, and so we're going to look at one proverb, but we're going to focus on Psalms today, and then we're going to go over the story that was just read for us in John chapter 11. Proverbs 14:13 says, "Even in laughter the heart may ache, and rejoicing may end in grief." Does this resonate with anyone else? That you can laugh and smile, but on the inside you're feeling something different? That your home life maybe isn't where you want it to go, so you have to practice your face and put on a good face for when you get to work so that you can somehow keep it together. Or maybe the opposite. Maybe work isn't what you wanted it to be or what you want it to look like, so you go home, you sit in your driveway for just a minute, make sure you collect yourself before you open that door. Maybe some of us even do that on Sunday morning. You have to put on the right face because you don't want people to see that you're actually sad or you're actually angry or you're upset, because what are they going to think? Even in laughter, the heart may ache, and rejoicing may end in grief. But Psalm 126 says, "Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy," as if the tears that we cry today are going to be the nourishment on the soil for the joy that will come soon. Psalm 34 says, "The righteous cry out, and the Lord hears them. He delivers them from all of their troubles. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." Sometimes in our life, when we're in that spot, we can feel the closest to the Lord. He is right there, reaching out to us. Psalm 40 says, "I waited patiently for the Lord, and He inclined to me and heard my cry. He drew me up from the pit of destruction, out of the miry bog, and set my feet upon a rock, making my steps secure. He put a new song in my mouth, and a song of praise to our God. And maybe the second most popular psalm, Psalm 30, verse 5, weeping may stay for the night, but joy may come in the morning. Ultimately, our hope is in the Lord. Hope is the belief that tomorrow will somehow be better, but hope in the Lord is the belief that tomorrow will be better because of Him, because of who He is. Sadness is expected in this life. We can expect it, especially when loss comes suddenly. Maybe we're left with an emptiness that never feels like it can be full. Maybe we feel like we can never recover. But we're told that although pain comes, joy is found in the Lord. The only one that can truly fill that hole, that brokenness, is Him in our lives. Even when it seems like our dreams or our hopes have died, that a loved one has passed, the Lord is there to fill us up when we are empty and to lift us up when we are broken. This is the story of John chapter 11. We heard pretty much the entire story this morning, so I'm not going to go through it verse by verse, but I do want to highlight a couple of things. In John chapter 11, which we just read, we are transported into a funeral service. Not only that, but we're transported into a situation where the emergency personnel were called. His name was Jesus, and they didn't get there in time. The person dies, and now there's a funeral. It's not just any service. This is also a close personal friend of Jesus, with the main characters being the sisters, Mary and Martha. They seem to be a very close-knit family, and they experience deep loss. Now, before I go through this passage, I want to highlight one thing. This is the last of Jesus' public miracles. After this, we start the Passion narrative, where he begins steps to go to the cross. And this, in my opinion, is one of the capstones. This is something that sets Jesus apart from every other religion and worldview and philosophy and false deity. This is another example where there is no God like ours. There is no deity worthy of praise or worship. There is one true God and King. He shows up, and his name is Jesus. Now, don't get me wrong, we've seen Jesus do miracles. He's even raised people from the dead. He's raised Jairus' daughter, and there was a widow at a town called Nain whose son passed away, and Jesus raised him up as well. But by the time Jesus gets to the funeral, it has been 4 days. Now, we have medical personnel here. I'm not going to get into detail, but after 4 days, the body starts to break down. Decomposition has already set in. For every other case, you could say that this was maybe a parlor trick, or maybe they weren't really dead. No. Lazarus has been dead 4 full days, sealed in a tomb, and is beginning to smell bad. So when Jesus asks the people to open the tomb, there's a pause, and they don't do it. Nobody moves. Martha says, "It can't happen, Jesus. It's too far gone. It's too late. The situation can't be saved. There's no hope for this situation." Have we ever felt that way this morning? John chapter 11. Jesus is ministering down by the Dead Sea. He gets word that Lazarus is sick. They send a runner, so maybe someone that actually ran all the way to him. And we see in verse 21 that when Martha hears that Jesus has come, Martha said to Jesus, she runs up to Jesus, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now, I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." And Martha said to him, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." So we see that Jesus' speed is definitely a mystery. He wasn't in a hurry. And we see Martha being pretty frustrated with the Lord. And we can ask very similar things that Martha did in a literal sense when we get into that situation or that position or that circumstance. Where is God? If God were only here, he could save. He could heal, he could help, prevent, and protect. I imagine that they had asked that same question over and over. Where is he? We need him here. Can't he see that Lazarus, my loved one, is in danger? Can't he do something? I imagine Lazarus is getting worse and worse. And they say, don't worry, because Jesus is going to come over the hill at any time. Jesus is never late. He's going to be here. He's going to come. He's right around the corner. Don't worry. Don't fret. Jesus will be here. And Lazarus gets worse. Jesus is there. Just keep looking to the hill. And Lazarus passes away. But that's okay, because we've seen Jesus do this before. It's okay. If Jesus shows up right now, at this very moment, everything will be made okay. But then they wrap his body, they put him in the tomb, and then another day passes, and hope is gone. Another day passes, and now it's impossible. Another day passes, and finally they look to the hill. Well, there he is. So Martha looks and runs to Jesus and says, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. It's interesting that passages of Scripture like this are read usually by how we react and how we interact in life. So if you're more prone to anger, then you're going to say, Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. This anger. If you're more sad or sorrowful, maybe there's tears. Lord, if you had only been here, my brother would not have died. It's not supposed to happen like this. He's supposed to be here in our time of need. Where were you? But I want us to hold on to something this morning. Verse 22 says, but even now I know that whatever you ask from God, God will give you. And then further down in verse 27, Martha says to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into this world. This morning, we don't want to dismiss disappointment. We don't want to get rid of sorrow. You can always bring it to the Father. But there is great power in the even now faith. In an even now follower of Christ. Can we say that that is us? In our time of anger, even then, do we trust in the Lord? In our time of fear and anxiety when nothing makes sense, even then, do we belong to Him? In our time of sadness and sorrow, are we going to say that I don't understand, I don't know what's going on, but even now, even in this moment, in this situation right now, even now, you are the Christ, the Son of God, and I believe in you. This is our call. If you take nothing else from this message, take this: to be an even now follower of Christ. Whatever weight that word holds, whatever the word now means for you, that even now, even in this season of sorrow or anger or hurt, that we give ourselves over to Him even now. Even if your situation seems as dead and as far gone as Lazarus, will you follow Him? Let us be an even now Christian, an even now follower of His. Verse 25, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. This is it. This is such a big statement from Jesus. This is the 5th of 7 I am statements in the book of John. Wherever He is, there is life. Even in sadness, even in our grief, whatever situation or circumstance, if we invite Him into it, if we let Jesus come into that, then He can bring life where there is only death. I like how some commentators put this. They call this Martha's foothold of her faith, that she can now use to climb higher. I'm not a very good climber, but I know the feeling of when you can't hold on any longer. You can't go any further up. This is the foothold of her faith, that she has just experienced loss. She's angry, she's upset, she's frustrated, but she puts her foot down And she says that I'm going to use this moment and this time to proclaim who Christ is, and lifts herself up in the middle of confusion and loss, heartache and pain. She still confesses that he is Christ, the Son of God. And through that, I believe, her faith pulls her up to the next level. The story continues in John chapter 11, verse 32. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said the exact same thing. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So Martha's done speaking. Martha goes back. Mary, the other sister, now finds out that Jesus is here. So she runs out. People actually follow her because they think that she's going to go grieve. She sees Jesus. She falls at his feet and says the exact same thing. But it feels a little bit different in this passage, doesn't it? She's on her knees, weeping before the Lord. Lord, if you had only been here, he would not have died. And when Jesus saw her weeping, and those who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. It certainly seems like both Mary and Martha are angry with Jesus, they're confused, or they're frustrated. I think the same trap that they may have fallen into can be the same trap that we are tempted to fall into today. And that is, if we interpret the love of God through our circumstances, instead of interpreting our circumstances through the love of God. That's the lens that we look at the world. If we see the love of God over here and we're looking through the lens of our circumstances, then how our life goes, whether or not it parallels with how we think it should go, is how we're going to feel about how God feels about us. But if we reverse that and we look at our situations and our circumstances through the love of God, how much different would that be? I had a family at a previous church who were devout. They came every Sunday. They came to all the Bible studies. They did all the things. But then one day, their young daughter was driving home, lost control of the wheel on an icy road, and is gone. At that moment, there was a moment in time, and they decided that they cannot believe in a God that would do this to their baby girl. They stopped going to church. Even now, when you ask them, hey, how's it going? It was hard today. Years and years and years later. This isn't saying that the sorrow is going to be easy. This isn't saying that you're going to have a suffering-free life. But when the sun comes in to the sanctuary, usually either Christmas or Easter, the whole room, the temperature of the room gets colder, and the lights almost seem like they dim, because he is filled with hatred. How dare God take my baby sister? This is the passage. How dare God take my brother? But even now, I will hold down, I will hold true. What would it look like if we view our circumstances, our situations, our lives through what we already know about God, through his love? Coming to service, worshiping together with a community of like-minded believers, attesting every week to who we know God is. Keep in mind, even in these moments of frustration and sorrow, these are still statements of faith. Mary and Martha both say, if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. They knew that he had the power, but just not that much. We knew that he has the ability. He could have healed him. Verse 34, where have you laid him? He asked. Come and see, Lord, they replied. So verse 35, Jesus wept. It is both the shortest passage of Scripture in our English Bible, but is also, in my opinion, one of the most powerful. It tells us that Jesus feels. He knows pain. When he walked with us, his pain and suffering and tears, they were not absent. Charles Spurgeon, a famous pastor, he preached 2 full, distinct sermons on this one verse, on 2 words. And that's when sermons used to be like an hour and a half, right? When it came almost to be like a hostage situation, right? 2 full sermons. And he would say, this passage is not a passage you read, this is a passage that you have to feel. When the Jews said, see how he loved him? Verse 37, but some of them said, there is always a some of them, isn't there, in our lives. Whenever we're doing good or we start, they're not going to believe it. Maybe they doubt. Some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? They're using Jesus' miraculous ministry against him. They're attesting to the fact that he opened the eyes of the blind, and they're saying, if he could do that, why couldn't he do this? It's this really weird switch where people have gotten so used to how good God is, how powerful Jesus is, how much we feel him in the presence and in the place, that when they don't experience that, they start to question him right there. Why did Jesus do it this way and not that way? Jesus obviously loves and cares for this man. Why didn't he do more? Why didn't he stop him from dying? Why didn't God intervene? Immediately after college, I went to Texas and I worked at a boarding school for troubled and at-risk teens. Some of these teens were kind of the worst of the worst. They would drive up in squad cars. The squad car would let them out, take the handcuffs off, and hand them to us and say, good luck. And so I went from being a single guy to a father of 12 very upset teenagers pretty much overnight. So I have quite a few stories from that. But one of my boys, we called him Slick. And Slick would get into trouble every time there was trouble that you could get into. He was always doing what you asked him not to do. You always had to have 2 eyes on him if you're cooking, whatever you're doing, until you put him in front of a canvas. For whatever reason, he loved art. So he sat in front of a canvas, and you could throw food at this guy, and it would just bounce off. He was so wrapped in this project or that project. Twice a year, we would have this huge blowout where an auditorium like this would be full, 200, 300 people, and we had a talent show where some of the kids and some of the girls, they would display their talent for all to see, and it was months of preparation and it was months of work. Well, Slick wanted to paint in front of everybody. So we said, okay, you've got basically a minute and a half, so what's the worst that could happen? So in front of about 200, 300 people, we put his canvas up and he plays some light music. He has 2 paintbrushes in his hands and he goes to work. And he's painting. He's painting like a madman, right? 30 seconds go by, 45 seconds go by, and his paint, the canvas, it looks terrible. It looks like he is doing a terrible job. We have no idea what he's going for. It doesn't make sense. So the director of the talent show looks at me and he's like, do we call it? We don't want them to be embarrassed. But I'm like, we don't have a whole lot of time. So minute and a half is done. The time ends and he steps back. And I don't know how, but it got worse. Right? The painting it's nowhere near what it is, but we have parents and his parents are there. So have you ever been there when they don't want the student to feel bad, so they kind of give you that pity clap, and for some reason it feels worse than if nothing happened? So we had 3 people who were giving him the pity clap in like a room of 300 people, and you just feel so bad for him. Slick finds me in the audience and he smiles. And I don't know why, but something washed over me. And I was like, he's got this. He puts black ink on his paintbrush and he makes this little squiggly line. And that little squiggly line helps show a little bit of what he's going for. And then Slick takes his canvas and he flips it upside down. And there's a whoosh that goes over everybody. And then he gets the claps and his parents are crying and it's this whole thing. He ended up getting 2nd place in the talent show. What happened was that Slick saw the full picture going into it. Even though we had only tiny bits and pieces that were revealed to us, at a time. And so we're thinking it's getting worse, this is getting embarrassing, it's making less and less sense as we question it. And I wonder how often that is true, how we approach the Lord. It's getting worse, it doesn't make sense, this isn't good. And I wonder how often he smiles on us and just says, I've got this. And then sometimes we are lucky enough, he is gracious enough to show us the grand reveal that this is what he was doing all along, that this is what he was going for. It makes sense, and it's actually beautiful. And that's why we trust him. That's why we wait. That even when we never see the great reveal, the line doesn't connect the picture for us, we never see the full picture, we know that God is still with us, that he sees the things that we can't. And God, unlike us and unlike anybody else, he has the power and the ability to make good come out of darkness. Not that he causes the darkness, not that he causes the evil or whatever happens, but that our God is powerful enough and that he is never caught by surprise. He is never caught off guard. He sees the picture. This picture, he said in the very beginning of our reading, he said Lazarus is going to come back from the dead. And Martha says, I know, we'll see him in heaven. And Jesus says, he'll be okay, as he's walking into the situation. We know how the story ends. Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, and you can preach another 3 messages off just this passage. But for this entire time, for multiple days, there was sorrow, there was grief, there was confusion. They had hope that if Jesus just showed up on time, everything would be okay. But Jesus is late. At least that's what they thought. You have to understand that Jesus could see what the disciples couldn't, even when he's trying to explain it. It happens all over the Gospels. When Jesus is teaching or leading and they don't get it, Jesus knew that grief would be comforted, life would be restored, and that because of this, many more would believe. How could they not? God's kingdom was going to be propelled forward. Lazarus, I have no doubt, is going to be one of the capstone ministers to Jesus' ministry, because they were at his funeral. He was gone for 4 days. And now he's back, and now he's witnessing and testifying. Let it be known, though, there will be a date, there will be a time where Lazarus is laid to rest again, finally. We don't read about that in any story, but we know that one day he passes away. Maybe Mary and Martha are there too, and I wonder what they would have to say on that day. Mary, Martha, everyone around was so focused on what was in front of them that they missed the one who was above them, who's greater than it all, who saw the full picture, can make sense out of the things that are confusing to us. I can tell you this, just like this story, like Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, your most effective ministry will come out of your greatest hurt if you give that hurt over to the Father. If you decide to be an even now follower of his.